his purview. And so lately he's been doing the work of getting the dredging, of consolidating all of the various interests to make the dredging happen in our small boat basin. And possibly over on the island, I'm not sure if that happened. But anyway, so I'd like to introduce Miles. He's going to make a presentation about the current happenings along the waterfront. An update.
Hello everyone, thank you for having me. So as Marion said, I'm going to just kind of go over some of the recent topics in our harbor operations, talk about this year's maintenance dredging at the small boat basin, as well as some of the operational and budgetary issues that our harbor fund is going through right now. So once again, I'll talk about the maintenance dredging and then look at our harbor fund status currently and what's gone on in the past related to our harbor fund and how that kind of affects our dredging opportunities and how we're going to be paying for dredging in the upcoming years. So the first part about maintenance dredging is, permitting is always a big issue. Previous in history, we had, certain ways of going about things that were acceptable to the regulatory agencies. That has since changed, and so now we've kind of had to change our direction and go in a different path as far as permitting is concerned. And then as far as operations, we've had certain types of dredges and certain disposal locations, and we've changed that, and as opposed to what we're doing now currently in 2017 and going forward. So in our previous permits, basically what happened is we had a suction head dredger. It went to all of the facilities that were publicly owned in the bay, used the suction head dredger, piped the material out onto the Samoa beach and disposed of it at the beach. In order to do that, it requires a coastal development permit because you're using a disposal site within the coastal zone. It also requires a 401 water quality certificate from the regional board, and then also an Army Corps nationwide permit for the operation, not only the disposal, but also for the operation itself. So when we had our previous permits, the maintenance dredging, we've done 3 in 1998. There was a maintenance dredging episode in 2007. There was a maintenance dredging episode. When we received and went after the coastal development permits for that, the majority of those permits were done on a per episode basis. So in other words, we would go out and get a coastal development permit, say we have 200,000 cubic yards to dredge, this is what we're doing with it, give us a one-time permit until we finish out that process. Same thing with the regional board and the water quality certificate. It was a per episode type of permit. We go out, explain the same project description to them, and get that per episode. For the nationwide permit and for the Army Corps, the most recent one we had was a 10-year permit that expanded from 1997 until 2007, and allowed for certain things to happen under that permit, and we were held to that permit. So we got 2 dredging episodes covered under that one permit. The costs for the permitting previously were significantly higher. Obviously, I'm sure everybody knows, the Coastal Commission has a very stringent regulatory guidelines, and it's hard to go through those and costs a lot of consultant fees and a lot of other monies. In 2007, we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on the permitting for that process, and I'll get to how we're doing it now and kind of the pros and cons of how we're doing it now. The current permits now, the Coastal Commission is kind of out of the picture. The Coastal Commission, because what we're doing now is using a clamshell dredge or an excavator and removing the material from our facilities, using that, putting it into a dump scow and taking it out 3 miles outside, which is outside the Coastal Commission's purview. So because it's not being disposed of in the coastal zone, we don't have to get a Coastal Commission permit, but we do have to get a federal consistency and a no effects determination from them. So that process is expedited significantly. Literally for this year, we started, we fought the battle to do what we did previously up until June of this year, and then had discussions with the EPA, multiple discussions with the EPA, did not get where we thought we could get, and ended up going in a completely different direction. We were able to secure all of these permits for our current dredging operations within a 2-month span. So it was significant significantly expedited and a lot of staff time in that. We probably spent about $9,000 in consulting fees, so it was significantly cheaper and a lot more expedited. I think a lot of that has to do with the public perception and the fact that, you know, this is the way that a lot of the NGOs and others wanted it to go, and so the regulatory agencies didn't feel that there was going to be any appeals of those processes, and so it was really quick to get those permits. But anyway, when we got the permits, we were able to secure 10-year permits. So the exemption that we have from the Coastal Commission, as well as the no effects determination, is good for 10 years. The Regional Water Quality Control Board's 401 certificate is for 10 years as well, and the Army Corps permit, of course, is for 10 years. So what we did is, for this year, we only had sampling done at 3 of our locations, which were Woodley Island, which is owned by the Harbor District, Small Boat Basin, and the and the Commercial Street Dock. With that data, typically in order to go out to hoods, it's a much more rigorous sampling process, but because those facilities are so close to the main channel that the Army Corps dredges, we were able to glean some of that data and submit our data and give it to the EPA for them to determine that it was okay to go out to hoods. And so right now we're only permitted under this current permit for those 3 locations. However, over the next 10 years, we're able to go to any location within the bay and do the appropriate sampling protocol. If it's close enough proximity to the main channel that the Army Corps dredge, we can do the same protocol that we did for the other facilities. But anyway, do that sampling, submit it to the EPA, get a suitability determination from them, and once we get that from them, then we can proceed under these other permits. So we plan on finishing off all the sampling analysis of our other locations that we have to do, which are Fisherman's Terminal, C Street Dock, F Street Dock, Kaido Fisheries, Bonnie Gould Dock, the Adorney, the BISC, the Aquatic Center for HSU, as well as the Samoa Boat Launch. So we'll be sampling those this year, submitting the data to them, and hopefully get approval for that. And once we get approval for that, we'll be able to dredge all of our facilities on an ongoing basis for 10 years. So from a permitting perspective, this process was a lot quicker, much more expeditious. From an operational side, it was a lot different. Previous operations, like I said, is we used a suction head dredger. It was more efficient not only in removing a higher volume of material at a quicker space, at a quicker rate, but also was able to get into our facilities. Like when we deal with the docks and stuff, it's not a big issue, but when we're at the marina, whether it's Woodley Island or our Small Boat Basin, the clamshell dredge and the excavator can get underneath the floats, but not as well as a suction head dredger. They're much more efficient in getting into those areas. And then, of course, the beach disposal. So the big issue with the beach disposal was, according to the EPA, which we never had any documentation of, is that the EPA had stated back in 1997 that when you dredge this time, this will be the very last time that you ever put it out on the beach. We never had a memo from them, never had anything. And then when we argued this year in 2017, they still allowed us to go in 2007, and they said, oh, that was our bad, we shouldn't have let you go in 2007. So we got into the regulations part of it, and the regulation part of it that was really frustrating was it had nothing to do with the contamination of the material. The stuff is cleaner than it's ever been over the past, 3 decades. It's 10 times cleaner than it has ever been. It's as clean as any sort of material that's out on the beach currently. What it came down to was the particle size of the material. Our material that's in our facilities is very fine. It's a silt-based material. It's probably about 20% sand and about 80% silt. In the past, and over the years, it's been a policy and not in a regulation that anything that is less than 50% sand cannot go on the beach because it's not considered to be beach replenishment. It's been nothing but a policy. We've been dealing with an individual that's worked at the EPA for 30 years. Nowhere in their regulations does it state that this stuff, if it's not meeting that 50% criteria, that it's considered a waste. And so their argument was that since it didn't have 50% sands, that it's considered a waste, and if you now want to put it onto the beach, you have to get it certified as a disposal site similar to the open ocean disposal site that we're going to now, which would be a very long and expensive process. We pointed at multiple studies that were done by the federal government. The USGS service did multiple studies in Tijuana as well as San Jose and did the same type of material that we have. We're close to, at least. San Jose had about 70% silts and about 30% sand. And they disposed of it and did a 5-year study to determine the fate of that material and whether there was any impacts. There were no impacts, and it was done by a federal agency, and so we tried to make that correlation. Hey, EPA, here's the USGS saying we're good, and EPA is still saying, no, that's not going to work. They did discuss potentially being able to do pilot projects similar to that with lower volumes, but we needed to get our facilities functional, and it wasn't really an option for us. I do think in the future that their stance is going to change. It's very similar to the wastewater industry. Biosolids, which used to be called sludge, which is basically the material from the wastewater treatment, was once considered a hazardous waste and was, had to go to Class A landfills, had to be disposed of in a certain way. After years of studies and looking at it, biosolids is considered something that you can beneficially reuse now. So it's no longer considered a waste as it once was. And not only were these studies on the fine sands, fine sediment material done by the USGS, the city of Eureka and the Harbor District, when we did the 2007 dredging, there was a lot of requirements included in that. Of those requirements was 5 years of monitoring. Through that 5 years of monitoring, the impacts to the area on the beach were very short-lived, anywhere from 3 to 4 months. And all of the material did not go in anywhere near that area. It was found far offshore and not have any impacts on the benthic area there. So there was really, in my estimation, absolutely no reason why that couldn't have happened, but they were digging their feet in the sand and definitely did. So rather than beat our head up against the wall and continue to, anyways, so this is the Nehalem dredge that did the previous two, it's a suction header dredge that did the previous two dredging, maintenance dredgings in the bay and was intended to do the current maintenance dredging this year. There is potential that it may continue to do that. There are other options that we could use with the material. There's dewatering locations that are upland dewatering sites that could be permitted. The problem with it is that they can't hold a lot of volume, so there's a potential to continue to use this. It just may need to be spread over some years. And then this is what it looked like back in 2007 when the material went there. Obviously, it's an eyesore, and obviously public perception of this is you're spraying blue goo into our pristine beach. The material is very high organic matter. It's very nutrient rich. The studies at USGS found that there actually could be a beneficial use to some of the benthic areas that this stuff is spread in. So it's very similar to sludge in the wastewater industry, but the public perception is not very good for it right now. So rather than beat our heads up against the wall, we decided to move forward. We were extremely pleased to find out that the permitting for this was much more expeditious. The Woodley Island isn't in the same state that the Humboldt Basin is. The Small Boat Basin is, at low and minus tides, and it's exposed sediment throughout. It's gotten better with this new dredging. But we were very happy to go through the permitting process and find that it only took a couple of months and was very inexpensive. However, the efficiency of it is not very good, and we're finding that out now. I mean, we started late. We could have started in June if we would have not fought the battle longer. And we could have started in probably June 15th of this year and had from June 15th until October 15th to dredge. And we probably could have gotten the entire 50,000. We have about 56,000 cubic yards in our marina right now. We probably could have gotten to all of that. We are not going to get to all of that. We ended up starting on September 15th. We had approval until October 15th. Staff applied for an extension of that, and so now we have approval until October 31st. Even with that extra 2 weeks, we're at about maybe 25,000 cubic yards now. We're hoping we can get another 10 and be at about 35,000 cubic yards. This should, make the majority of our marina functional and in a good state, but we're most likely going to have to come back next year. The other issue that we're having is that we felt when we would get into the channels in our marina that once we dug it we can go to 8 foot below mean low water. We felt once we dug into that, there would be some sloughing off of the material from underneath the floats into those holes. That hasn't happened. It may happen with more tides and currents and stuff. We were able to get into, I don't know if you're familiar with our dock, but our D dock, which is the farthest kind of northeast dock that we have next to the boat launch, we used an excavator there. Extremely inefficient. I'll show you pictures, but there was a comment made in one of our local blogs that it's similar to having a teaspoon to empty out an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So it was very inefficient. It was effective in the sense that you could pull the material out from underneath there, similar to what the suction head dredger could, but it was a very long and tedious process. When I show you the pictures, you'll see why it was so bad. And then our disposal, of course, the material gets collected. We have to double handle the material in most of our marina. We have to take it, put it in a smaller container, and then from that container take it to the larger scow, because the scow is too big to fit anywhere into any of the parts of our marina. So it's extremely inefficient. The good thing about Hoods, the open ocean disposal site, which is 3 miles off of the entrance here, is that it, for the Army Corps, they've been told that it's full and that, they're only going to have so many more years of using that and they're going to have to find another disposal site. And talking with the EPA, because our materials, it's kind of the exact opposite of the beach, which I think is asinine. But because our material is so fine that we could do this out at Hoods for years to come, for the next 3 or 4 decades. It's extremely expensive and everything, but I mean, from a capacity standpoint, we can continue to do that because we have such a low ratio of sand material that goes out there. So from that standpoint, it's a good idea. So this is the beginning of our dredging. That's our boat launch. That is a 55-foot long arm on an excavator. We were able to, we got this to great levels. This and our C dock and pretty much, our D dock and it's pretty much our C dock, the channels are at a good level. They're probably about 8 feet, which is as deep as we could go. This took a very long amount of time. It's, we have 56,000 cubic yards that we need to do. This is a 1-yard bucket on an excavator. So it scrapes that up, pulls it up, does I think I have a picture, does a 180-degree rotation and scoops 1 yard at a time. Maybe 1.5 yards. So, maybe 3/4. For this, yeah, sometimes 3/4. Yeah.
Is there a reason why they can't use a bigger bucket?
Yeah, because that arm extension on it, we were having problems even with this, with it blowing out a lot, and so there was a problem with that. We could have used a shorter arm, which we have out there now. We have a smaller arm one. Yeah, and so it has a bigger bucket on it, but not much. And when I show you the clamshell is a lot bigger. That's got a 5-yard bucket on it. You can take a lot. But this was so those are all Connex boxes that were retrofitted to put onto a barge. We'd fill up all those Connex boxes, head over to Schneider's dock. You have an excavator there, unload that material onto a scow. These held maybe 200 yards, and so this process was really tedious and took a good portion of our time. Another reason why we had the long arm on excavator on here is because when Mercer Fraser got this, they also got the Coast Guard bid, and the small boathouse was required in order to dredge that to reach inside of there. They couldn't get any equipment in there. They had to get in there with this, and so the reason why it was on our job for a long time is because they were going back and forth, and until they finished the Coast Guard job, it didn't make sense to take it off and redo it. But we received a huge benefit in this. This would have cost at least another $350,000 if we didn't have the Coast Guard bid on this. They paid for the majority of the mobilization. So when I get to the cost per yard, I'll tell you the difference, but it would have been a heck of a lot more money if the Coast Guard wasn't involved. This is the clamshell dredge, and as you can see, it does get a lot more volume, but also as you can see, it's huge, and it doesn't fit into slips. It barely fits into our channel between our A and B dock. And so another problem that we have is it would have been nice to start on the inside of the marina and move out, but because of the amount of accumulation of sediment, you have to dig your way in. And so it makes it extremely inefficient when you dig your way in, and then come back out. When you have to dig your way in, if you're in between 2 slips, and there's our K-dock, which is the boundary of it. When you come in, you have to put in the disposal barge behind it and come in. It would be great if you could bring them all the way to the end of that, have the disposal barge behind it, and go chink on your way. But now you have to come in, this is actually on the corner here, you have to turn it, and then as you have to unhook, rehook, and go down that way as you move in. So it was really inefficient. I think that in the future, when we get it to a manageable level, this is going to be a lot more feasible and a lot more reasonable for I think the whole bay's purpose, because this type of operation, any contractor could bid on it with the sub, with the barge. So we could have Vegas, we could have Hooven, we could have Mercer Fraser, we could have so many people up here that don't have to do the mobilization and stuff. The sticking point is we don't have a scow here. And so that money that was saved for that scow was paid for by the Coast Guard. It is a significant amount of money. You got to bring in, it's about 350 feet wide and 60 feet. It comes up from either Richmond or Portland. It's a big effort to get that here. So I've been talking to all the contractors and telling them this is a great opportunity to get into the business and buy a scow. Because if you had a scow that was maybe 300 cubic yards and we got to a maintenance dredging level, you can avoid all of the permitting issues and put it on a scow. And it would also be better for beneficial reuse. There's a lot of sea level rise projects that are potentially coming up around the bay. In some areas, if the draft isn't, the draft requirement isn't too much, you could take this barge and put it right next to a site where you plan on doing some sea level rise work. We've been talking to the Coastal Conservancy. They have a real deficit of material down at White Slough for their project there. We've been looking at the draft and the possibility of the upcoming dredging seasons for them to cover the cost of bringing a scow up here. And if it fits and can get down to White Slough, just have it down at White Slough as close as you can get to it, have an excavator on shore, pull the material out of it, and then reuse it downside.
Could you lay your suction dredge pipeline over the White Slough?
So that's a huge expense. We looked at that, and so you need extra booster pumps. I think it's 7 or 8 miles, I think, and so every mile you need a booster pump, and they're extremely expensive. It can be done. The other problem there, it works because the way they designed it is that, this stuff is, when you have the suction dredger, it's 90% water. And so they have containment sites. If you don't have it, like, it would be great if you just threw this, like at our ocean outfall, and our ocean outfall goes into the bay, we have a million problems there. It'd be great if we could hook it up to that and just the problem is it's going to cause turbidity in the water. You have compliance issues with the ocean plan and all of those things. But at White Slough, it would work. It's just the cost to do that. The booster pumps, I think $110,000, $120,000 per booster pump. You need, 8 of them? I think we have 1 right now. Our booster has 1, I think. So it would be extremely expensive.
What is the cost of the scow?
A brand new one? A brand new one is about anywhere, depending on the size, anywhere from $2 million to $3 million. But if you look at, I spoke to a lot of the contractors and told them this, is if you look at the bids that won for this, your return on investment is pretty damn good. You're going to be probably paying it off within 2 or 3 years because you got the bulk fuel plant, you got Sierra Pacific, you got the Harbor District, you got the city, you got all these different agencies that, other than the Harbor District and the city, have been doing clamshell dredging for all of their operations. And so 900,000. So the bid that won at Coast Guard, they only had 2,000 cubic yards. And remember, we have 56,000. They only have 2,000 cubic yards in there. That bid came in at $960,000. And so over half of that was in mobilization and demobilization costs. So, this is the scow when it's full. When it's full, it's probably it's supposed to be 1,700, but there is that's another good thing about this is that you don't have the viscosity. It's a lot, it's a lot more viscous than the material coming out of it. So this 1,700 yard scow, amount of actual material is about 1,300 to 1,400 yards. So every time we fill that up, it's a 4-hour round trip out to Hoods and back. And what would be nice is if you had 2 and you could do alternating, and we looked into that, but the availability, these are not good. You have a window up and down the coast from Alaska all the way down to southern end of Mexico, and you have a window of June until October 15th, and there's a demand for these things all up and down the coast, and so there's not, their availability isn't quite there. We were going to do this project with a 300 yard scow, and we would have been in an even worse spot as far as the amount of materials.
Who supplies the ton to pull that?
Leroy, so Zerling, does all the tug work for this, and so they're not really a sub. Mercer Fraser hired on his staff, and they've been working. Not nice, and they said, see Leroy, tell him to get to work. No, I'm just joking. He's been working very hard. It's been a long process.
How do you empty that?
So it's a dump scow, so the belly opens. And so it goes out the hoods, and then once it gets in the spot, there's certain quadrants that we can dump in, and it just opens up. And then dumps it out there. And you can do similar projects. So I mean, this stuff is more viscous. You could probably get permitted something inside the bay, potentially our outfall, to where you could take this over to the outfall and just open it. And I don't know, I mean, you have to talk to the regulatory agencies, but it's not as turbid as the other material that we have from the suction head dredger. So that's the hoods side, so just out the entrance. It's about 3 miles, a little bit over 3 miles out to hoods, where that scow goes all the time. So costs. You know, we, like I said, had a very good deal because of the Coast Guard. This would have been more like about, right now we're looking at $31,000 a day for the operations. It's probably gone up a little bit more than that because of some of the inefficiencies that we've realized since we're there. And it breaks down to about 17,000 cubic yards. I mean, excuse me, $17 per cubic yard.
Thank you.
If
Can't see.
you don't need glasses. It's about $17 cubic yard. But if we didn't have the Coast Guard job that was here, this would have been at least $25 to $30 a cubic yard in order to do this. And it would have significantly reduced the amount of money that the amount of material that we could have removed. The suction head dredger, it's about $7 to $10 a cubic yard. And it's extremely efficient. Would have been a lot quicker to do than what we're doing now. That savings is from the not from Coast Guard paying for the mobilization and demobilization costs for this. That's the main stuff. I'll just, if you guys have any questions, just feel free to raise your hand.
How often is Coast Guard doing their dredging?
So in their own facilities, so the Coast Guard only does their own facilities. I think they do their, their docks and stuff like that. I think they do it pretty routinely, maybe every other year or something like that. But the small boathouse is pretty infrequent, I think maybe every 5 years or something, because it just doesn't accumulate as fast in there.
And is there coordination with tuning into that again?
Well, we want to do that with everybody. So I mean, what we did for this one, it was an emergency permit. I mean, an emergency procurement, because typically we'd have to go out to bid and do all of these things. But we were in a state, if we didn't get this done, and we had to go out to bid, it would take 3 or 4 more months. Since that was there, we said, okay, we're going to jump on board with them and then go with them. I think it's a great idea to have that continue so that there's a mutual. For us, it was very easy. If it was mutual, we would have gotten it, and we would have had to pay our half of that. Mobilization and demobilization.
So my question is really for you and Richard. So what is it the dredge of the harbor has? Is that a suction?
Yes.
And so can that be used, or is it being used for the West Sea project?
Yes, it's being used for White Sea project once we get it submitted for doing King Salmon Channel.
And
And just for Miles' sake, Miles did a lot of lobbying and a lot of coordination between all the different agencies, and had actually had pretty much agreement from every agency, which was quite miraculous. And then it came down to one agency that said and they hadn't been showing up to the meetings. That was the EPA, and they were the ones that said that they wouldn't allow on the beach spoils, or the spoils to go to the beach. All the other agencies all agreed that that was the most efficient and environmentally safe and everything, and I felt bad because Miles really hung tough with the EPA to tell them and what he felt, and I think all the agencies agreed with it.
yeah, and the other thing with the permitting, and I totally agree, the EPA was, and it's odd to me. I mean, there's nothing they can point to in the regulations that say that it's considered a waste. It's
Well, then they
simply
have
a
to,
policy.
You sue them, have you prove in court that they have to do that.
I'd love to see the federal government. Will you help me?
Because we're doing that. We seem to be doing that a lot these days. So,
No, the
California.
other thing with the permitting too that's been a big game changer since 2007 is the longfin smelt's been listed. And so when we did the dredging previously, we could get away with not having to get a take permit for coho because we did it in the winter season. And so when we did it in the winter, coho's supposed to be out of the bay, we could do it in the winter, pump it out there, and we were fine. Now that longfin smelt is, we have to worry about the longfin smelt in the bay. That has an issue in the winter, and so it would have to be a take permit. That's another big issue with the suction head dredger, which I think is absolutely asinine, that they consider a suction head dredger definitely requiring a take permit, because there are huge props that drive throughout our bay all day long that are just like a suction head dredger, but we don't make every single boater out there get a take permit. And so that's something that's really being held over our heads, is that, oh, you have to get a take permit. Well, I mean, they even ran it in the water, and just to test it, to see it works fine. They just ran it on, put it in open water, and got briefed by a regulatory agency saying that you cannot do that, you need to take it before you even put the damn thing in the water. So,
Frustrated much?
yeah. I don't know, the one public meeting I got some pretty nasty emails about my attitude, but it's frustrating when you go through these things and you talk from a standpoint of, look, you guys are here to protect the environment, and when they're telling us to go and do these things, beneficial reuse, the way that they're talking about beneficial reuse, they're not looking at carbon gas emissions, they're not looking at the amount of double handling, all of those things. Even the operation that we're having now, we want to do a study and see how much it is. Well, it's not only not efficient, but it's more impactful to the environment. They're holding their hat on the fact that fine-grained sand are somehow going to be contaminating the fauna. When, okay, we're going to put it out. Their suggestion is to go to the Samoa Lagoons. We go to Samoa Lagoons, put 40,000 cubic yards out of Samoa Lagoons. You're going to take that to another location in 20-yard, probably 10-yard dump trucks. You know how many truck trips that is? It's asinine. But you know, that's, you know, and we talked to the EPA. Well, that's not my purview. That's not my purview. You know, I don't do the gas, you know, greenhouse gases and stuff. So.
Well, that's lateral thinking.
Yeah, but it's gonna. I think it is gonna change. I think that it's just a matter of time. USGS, especially in our area here, have been doing studies on all of our salt marshes here, and the salt marshes here have a really big deficit of fine material, and you know, makes all this, and then there's a huge erosion problem on North Jetty, north of the North Jetty. And so all of these things point towards going towards that. It's just a matter of doing studies. And so, you know, if we could get approval from the EPA and say, hey, if you let Santa Cruz do 10,000 cubic yards, let us do 10,000 cubic yards. It doesn't, you know, really change anything, but it'll get us, you know, data to say that this is not impactful.
What was the reason for October 15th? Why is that the deadline?
That's cohosts start coming back.
Oh, it's
And
finished.
so now they had a new study out, so when we applied for it, we found out about the study, and they found that the adults weren't in the bay until like November 1st typically, and so we got it moved.
That's extension.
You may have announced this already, but where you're using the bucket to fill those containers, you know where you're using that?
Yep.
The bucket. Could you just use the suction to fill the containers?
But yeah, we would have, it would be great, but it's 90%, it's 90% water.
Yeah.
So you would have, if you have a 1,300 yard scow, you would have, you know, what, 130 cubic yards, and the rest of it would be all water. And so what it'd be great if you could spew it in there and let it de-water and then decant off the top, but they won't let you do that. But it's just not functional. You can't, I mean, you could have a scow the size of the bay. It's probably what it would take. I mean,